Morning, my grandmother's estate lawyer called. My husband was still in bed. It was a Tuesday. I know because I had back-to-back meetings starting at 8, and I'd already packed my lunch, already poured coffee into my travel mug, already stood in front of the bathroom mirror long enough to notice the circles under my eyes had stopped being temporary. The lawyer's name was Mr. Hartwell, and he spoke in the kind of measured, careful tone that people use when they're delivering news they know will change something. My grandmother had passed 6 weeks earlier, my mom's mom, Grandma Ruth, who smelled like lavender hand cream and kept butterscotch candies in a glass dish on her coffee table. She'd left me $47,000. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not a chair. The floor. My back against a cabinet, phone pressed to my ear, listening to Mr. Hartwell explain the transfer process and the timeline, and I just kept thinking about her hands, how they looked when she dealt cards at the kitchen table, how she'd squeeze mine whenever I visited and say, "You always were the one who showed up, sweetheart." I told my husband when he finally came downstairs at 9:30. He poured himself coffee, listened, and then said, "That's great. That could really help fund the Cincinnati project." The Cincinnati project. His business idea, a logistics consulting firm he'd been building for 2 years, which at that point had one client, a cousin who paid him in referrals. He'd invested $11,000 of our joint savings into it already. We'd argued about that money. Not argued, he'd presented it as a decision already made. And I'd swallowed everything I wanted to say because I didn't want to be the wife who didn't believe in her husband. "It's from my grandmother," I said. "Right, but it's family money. It goes into the joint account." I looked at him. He was stirring his coffee, not even looking at me. I said, "I haven't decided what I'm doing with it yet." He looked up then. "What does that mean?" "It means I haven't decided." He set his mug down, and I watched his face do something I'd seen it do before, a kind of recalibration, like he was deciding which version of himself to deploy. He chose the calm one. Reasonable voice. Patient eyes. "We're married," he said. "We don't have my money. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. I wasn't innocent in how we got here. I know that, now in a way, I didn't then. When we got married 5 years ago, I was 28 and so relieved to have found someone who seemed solid, who had plans and direction and strong opinions about things like where to eat and which neighborhood to live in. I'd spent my whole 20s second-guessing myself. He never seemed to second-guess anything. I confused that for strength. And so gradually, quietly, I started shrinking my own preferences to fit inside his. We moved to Columbus because it worked better for his career pipeline. I switched to remote work so I could be flexible around his schedule. When he decided we needed a bigger apartment, I agreed even though the rent made me anxious. When he started the Cincinnati project, I told myself this was what you did. You believed in your partner. You didn't nickel and dime dreams. I made up the difference in our household expenses with my salary from my job as a UX researcher at a mid-sized tech company. I paid the electric bill, the internet, the groceries, the vet bills for our cat. I told myself we were a team. What I didn't say out loud, not to him, not to anyone, I had started to feel like I was paying for a life I hadn't exactly chosen, while he moved through it freely. And then Grandma Ruth died and left me $47,000, and something in me said no, not no to him. No, to the version of myself that had been saying yes to everything for 5 years. He didn't yell. That's the thing people don't expect when I tell this story. They brace for the scene where someone throws something or storms out. He didn't. He sat at the kitchen table that evening with a yellow legal pad and walked me through, in his patient voice, why it made financial sense to pool the inheritance. Market returns. Combined assets. Compound interest over time. He was calm. I was the one whose hands were shaking. I said I wanted to keep it in a separate account, at least while I figured out what I wanted to do with it. He said, "This is how resentment starts, when couples start thinking of money as mine and yours." I almost laughed. I thought about 5 years of electric bills, I thought about the vet emergency last March when our cat ate a piece of string and I paid $2,400 while he was in Cincinnati for a client meeting, the cousin, and sent me a thumbs up emoji when I texted him about it. I said, I think we already have mine and yours. I just didn't notice until now. That landed differently than anything else I'd said. I saw it on his face. Not hurt exactly. Something closer to recalculation. He said, I don't know who you're becoming lately. I said, me neither, but I think I'm starting to. I called my sister that night, my oldest sister. She lives in Portland, works in non-profit fundraising, has strong opinions and gives them freely, which I've spent most of my life finding exhausting and now found necessary. He called it family money, I said. Did he mean his family? Because it wasn't his grandma. That's basically what I said. She was quiet for a second. What do you want to do with it? I hadn't let myself answer that question yet. I'd been so focused on the argument, on defending the money, that I hadn't actually thought about what I wanted. I don't know. Maybe pay off part of my student loans. Maybe just have it. Have something that's mine. That's not unreasonable. He thinks it is. Yeah, she said. I know. And her voice had something in it I didn't want to hear, a knowing she'd been holding for a while. Have you always thought this? I asked. Long pause. I think you've worked really hard to be a good partner to someone who hasn't worked as hard to be one to you. And I think you've known that for longer than you're admitting. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I opened the separate account on a Thursday, a high-yield savings account, my name only, at a bank I'd used in my 20s before we merged finances. The inheritance transferred in 10 days. 53 days after Grandma Ruth died, $47,000 sat in an account my husband didn't have access to. He found out because I told him. I wasn't hiding it. That felt wrong. And also, if I was going to do this, I needed to do it without apology. He said, you actually did it. Yes? So we're doing separate finances now. We're keeping this money separate. The rest can stay how it is. That's not how marriage works. I said, I think we've had different ideas about how marriage works for a while. He went quiet. Then, this is about more than the money, isn't it? Yes. He left for the gym. Came back 2 hours later. We didn't fight that night. We were careful with each other, polite in the way that's actually a form of distance, and I lay awake until 2 a.m. thinking about the word enabling and whether I'd spent 5 years practicing it without realizing. His sister called me 3 weeks later, his younger sister. She and I had always gotten along better than he and I got along with each other's families, which is its own kind of sign I hadn't read clearly enough. She lived 20 minutes away, and we'd grab coffee sometimes, and I'd always appreciated that she treated me like a person and not an accessory to her brother. She said she'd heard there was tension. He told her I was pulling away and acting selfish with my grandmother's money. I told her what happened. All of it, not the cleaned-up version. The 5 years of bills, the Cincinnati project, the $2,400 vet bill and the thumbs-up emoji. The legal pad and the patient voice and I don't know who you're becoming. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. He told you it was selfish, she said finally. To keep money from your own grandmother. Yes. Okay. Another pause. I'm going to talk to him. And I need you to know that I love my brother, but what you just described is not a partnership. What you just described is you funding a lifestyle for 2 people while he builds something for 1. I started crying. Not sad crying, more like the crying that happens when someone names a thing you've been carrying alone for long enough that you stop noticing the weight. I don't know exactly what she said to him. I know she drove to our apartment on a Sunday afternoon. I know she was there for 2 hours. I took a walk, gave them space, went to the coffee shop on the corner, and sat with my laptop and didn't work and ordered a scone I didn't eat. When I came home, my husband was sitting at the kitchen table. No legal pad this time. His hands were flat on the table and he looked smaller somehow, not defeated, but like someone who'd had something explained to them that they'd been successfully avoiding having explained for a long time. He said, "I think I owe you an apology." I sat down across from him. What changed? She asked me to list everything I'd contributed to the household in the last year, like actually list it. And He stopped. I couldn't. I waited. I've been treating this like a team effort when I was only showing up for certain parts of the team. He said it haltingly, like the words were working against some resistance. And I think I knew that, somewhere. And I made it about the money because it was easier than making it about that. I said, "I need you to understand that the account stays. That's not the thing we're fixing." "I know. The thing we're fixing is what made me feel like I needed it." He nodded. His eyes were red. "I don't want you to feel like you disappear in this marriage. I need more than not wanting it," I said. "I need you to actually see when it's happening." We went to couples therapy. Dr. Detzer, Okafor. Tuesday evenings, a small office in the Short North neighborhood with a white noise machine outside the door. I want to say it was immediately productive and clarifying. It wasn't. The first 3 sessions felt like excavation. Slow, uncomfortable. Sometimes I'd drive home and sit in the car for 10 minutes before going inside. But things started shifting. Small things first. He started tracking his actual contributions. Not in a scorekeeping way, but in a paying attention way. He picked up the groceries. He called the landlord about the broken exhaust fan that I'd been meaning to handle for 2 months. He made dinner on the nights I had late calls without me asking. I started saying things I'd been swallowing, not as accusations. As information. "I'm feeling like I'm carrying too much this week. I need you to take something off my plate." It turned out I didn't actually know how to do that. I'd learned so early to just handle things that asking felt foreign, almost embarrassing. Dr. Okafor said once, in the 3rd month, "Both of you have some learning to do." He's learning to show up. You're learning to ask. I thought about that comment my sister had made, back at the beginning. "You've worked really hard to be a good partner to someone who hasn't worked as hard." She was right. But she wasn't completely right. Some of the dynamic I'd built too. I'd made myself so easy to take for granted. I'd never said I need more from you. I'd just gotten quietly exhausted and quietly resentful and waited for him to notice. That part was on me. I owned it. The Cincinnati project is restructured now. He brought in a real business partner, someone with actual logistics experience, and they scaled back the original scope significantly. It's smaller and more realistic, and he's more honest about what it is. A side project, not a destiny. That shift alone changed something in the air between us. The $47,000 is still in my account. I paid off $19,000 in student loan debt with part of it. The rest is sitting there, earning interest, and I look at the balance sometimes not because I'm counting it, but because of what it means. That I have something that's mine. That I made a choice that was hard and right. That I didn't fold under the pressure of a patient voice and a legal pad. My grandmother would have understood. She was married for 41 years, and she once told me, when I was in college and asking her about relationships, "Make sure you stay a person inside of it, sweetheart. The good ones let you." I think I'm still figuring out which kind I have. Some days I feel certain. Some days I'm still watching and waiting and hoping the changes are the kind that stick. But I stopped disappearing. That part I'm sure of, and for now, that's what I'm holding on to. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect, not in a mystical way, just in the plain, honest way that life tends to work when you pay close enough attention. My husband didn't become someone who dismissed my grandmother's inheritance because he was cruel. He became that person slowly, through a series of small choices that I made it easy for him to make. Every bill I paid without saying anything. Every opinion I swallowed because it wasn't worth the argument. Every time I told myself this is what partnership looks like, when what I actually meant was this is easier than confrontation. I built the dynamic as much as he lived in it. That took me a long time to admit, and I think it's the most important thing I've learned through all of this. There's something about choosing to stay quiet, again and again, that trains the people around you. Not intentionally, They don't sit down and calculate it. But if nothing you do ever costs you anything, you stop believing it ever will. My husband had spent 5 years learning that I would adjust, absorb, and continue. So when my grandmother died and left me something that was mine, something I hadn't built around his preferences or his schedule or his Cincinnati project, his first instinct was to fold it into the system we'd created, the system where everything eventually became shared, and shared somehow always meant managed by him. What changed things wasn't me yelling. It wasn't an ultimatum or a dramatic confrontation. It was one quiet decision. Opening an account, transferring the money, and not apologizing for it. That one act of holding a line did more than 5 years of quiet resentment ever could. Not because it punished him, but because it made something real. It introduced a consequence. And consequences, I've learned, are how people understand what you actually mean. His sister asking him to list his contributions. That was its own kind of consequence, not a punishment either. Just clarity. She handed him a mirror in the form of a question, and he had to look at what was actually there. That's what people with real integrity do for the ones they love. They don't let you stay comfortable in a version of yourself that's smaller than you should be. Grandma Ruth did that for me my whole life. Danielle did it for her brother. And slowly, reluctantly, he started doing it for himself. I don't think strength is the absence of fear or confusion. I think it's making the right choice anyway, even when your hands are shaking. Even when you've spent so long making yourself easy to take for granted that standing firm feels almost like a betrayal of who you've been. The version of me who sat on the kitchen floor and cried when Mr. Dowler, Hartwell called. She deserved better than what she'd been settling for. So did the version who made coffee every morning while her husband slept. Recognizing that wasn't self-pity. It was just honesty. And honesty, I've come to believe, is where everything real begins.